Right. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited to have you joining us today for our spring update, we're calling it, on the Inchstone project. And today we're going to really walk you through the early stages of analysis on the DEE Parent Speak survey that we did and finished up late last year, and are really excited to dig in with all of you. There is going to be a lot more coming from this in the coming months, but we really just wanted to get this out to you all as soon as possible, start the conversation, and give you guys insights into what we're finding. So I'm going to do a quick introduction. Some of you may be new to the Inchstone project here. To begin with, just so you know, it's so confusing, I think. So sometimes we like to just go step back a minute. So the Inchstone project is actually operating under a nonprofit called Decoding Developmental Epilepsies, which used to be called Wishes for Elliot, that I am the co-founder of with Jayetta, who's on the line with us as well. And we run the International SCN8A Alliance, Deep Connections, and the Inchstone Project, which is really under Deep Connections. So the Inchstone Project came about because we really were, with the onset of precision medicine and genetic therapies, we knew that clinical trials were going to be coming about for populations who were more profoundly impacted by the rare epilepsies. And we were worried that kids like my son Elliot and a lot of my friends' children would not really be able to be meaningfully measured and see the change in these kids in the clinical trial setting. And that would put at risk potential treatments that maybe were able to help, but not necessarily in ways that were measurable given current assessment tools. So we're really taking an approach that is very FDA centric, making sure that we're following all of the guidance coming out of the Food and Drug Administration, who are responsible for approving treatments. And really, it's also about equity. We want to make sure that every person, regardless of how profound their impairments are, can have even their smallest inchstones of progress, measured and counted. So today, we're walking through a little bit about what the vision and approach is for the Inchstone project. We want to highlight some of the results from the DEE Parent Speak survey that we had an incredible turnout from this community. Thank you to all of you who participated in this. We're really grateful for you sharing your dreams, really, for your children and their capacities, what they can do. Too often we are given these assessment tools that tell us what our children cannot do over and over and over again, very painfully. But it was really powerful to be able to hear what your children can do, what they enjoy doing. So we're going to talk about all of these things. I'm not going to run through all of them. We're going to open it up. We'd love to hear from you, get questions from you all. And we'll share some additional ways that you can continue to be involved in helping the Inchstone project meet its goals. Wanted to share, this is our growing research team. Really excited that we have new faces that we've added here. I think many of these faces you may already know, but you'll see today. And I'm not going to run through everyone, but this is an incredible team, multinational, very different backgrounds that we all bring to the table that are helping us shape this project, including caregivers like myself, and siblings of people living with these disorders, and so it's really a pleasure to be working with this really diverse team. So overall, we have a very ambitious plan, which is to, within 5 years, have validated outcome assessment measures that will work to measure progress in those most profoundly impacted by developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, but also, frankly, in just rare disease. We've heard feedback from groups like ALS that they need measures like this as well because of the deterioration they see in their population. It's just that once you start getting to these lower levels of skill, they're just not tools that are available. So right now we are in year 3 of the project, in the middle of phase 2. We did this amazing survey with the community that really helped us better understand your priorities, and that's what we're going to focus on. This project is driven by what we hear from the community. From that, we are going to be doing some clinical assessments in the clinic to further refine and then develop this battery of tools. Well, not really develop, we're adapting, frankly. Well, we're developing some too. So it's a little developing and a little adapting. And then start to set out toward the last couple of years, which are validation that helps us ensure that these are tools that can be used and replicated in clinical settings. So in terms of, the working hypotheses for sorry, this slide is a little bit busy now that I look at it. Really the idea is that we need more sensitive and validated outcome measure assessments, or they're also called clinical outcome assessments. So if you see us use the term COA, that's what it means. And that these are really critical for precision medicine and genetic therapies that are emerging. And if we do these tools one by one, disease by disease, which is very powerful, there's some really incredible work that's being done by specific disease groups. It just is not sustainable because it takes years and years to validate these for each disorder. So doing this together gets us closer to precision medicine and better tools faster for the entire community. So we really believe that DEEs and severe NDDs, which are neurodevelopmental disorders, have many common characteristics, and this survey helps illuminate that, and that there are similar priorities for improvement. So next steps are that development of this Inchstone clinical outcome assessment battery of validated tools to be used across the disorders is really going to improve meaningful inclusion of developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, or those with really more severe and profound epilepsies and the comorbidities that come with that. More meaningful inclusion of them in clinical trials, and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of these trials so that drugs that help with things other than seizures, which is really what's being measured most of the time, that they can make it to market if they're truly helping our families. So I'm going now to hand it over to Ann Berg, who's going to take us through a little bit more background and initial findings on the survey.
Okay, well, thank you, Gabby, for that great introduction. This survey was just an amazing experience, I think, for all of us. And literally a few hundred parents came and helped with it. So thank you so much for your participation and for teaching us about your children, about yourselves, and about what's important. The story, the survey was really geared to get at individuals who have severe to profound impairment. And initially, our recruitment criteria were that we wanted children at least a year old and who had very severe communication challenges, were unable to walk or feed themselves. I mean, they could do one, but not the other. They either couldn't walk or they couldn't feed themselves, and had at least one diagnosis of seizures, developmental delay, intellectual disability, or autism. After going to the LGS meeting in September, last September, we got a lot of feedback that what we were considering severe did not really encompass all that was severe. And in very specific response to parent feedback, we took out the requirement of either being unable to walk or feed oneself. So our sample changed a little bit, but I think that really enriched the study. Okay. So in the end, and thank you all so much, we have a total of 268 parents who completed at least some information for their child. The children, I'm going to talk about the children who, of course, may be adults at this point, but we had a little bit over half female, 56%. The average age of the children was 8.7 years. And in the purple chart there, you can see the number of individuals who came from very specific gene groups. And this was amazing. I mean, not a lot is written on the ASXLs, 1 or 3. We had about 20 each. We have a lot from SCN2A, SCN8A, FOXG1, Shank, PMS, and then across genes, we had a huge participation from the LGS community And then, as you can see, a lot of people who came from a variety of other gene backgrounds, as it were. In terms of those basic diagnoses I mentioned, you can see that only a little bit less than 2/3 said, yes, my child has a diagnosis of epilepsy, although another 12% said, yes, my child has seizures, although does not have a diagnosis. So, a little under 3/4 with epilepsy, or about 3/4. A good number with autism, about 1/3 had a diagnosis, another 24% had symptoms, although not a formal diagnosis. Most individuals had a global developmental delay or were suspected of having one. If we add the suspected indefinite, it's almost 100%. Same thing for, we lost intellectual disability, but the same thing for intellectual disability. And then we have a lot about CVI, although that was not one of the requirements to be in the study. And you'll hear from Dr. Becky Homer more about that. One thing that's really important, and people are starting to realize, is that these disorders entail a lot of other difficulties with neurologic function. And this really came out with a large proportion who reported their children had hypotonia. And hypotonia, it's a problem by itself, but it contributes to so many other difficulties that children have, including with aspiration, with constipation, with basic movement. So it's a really critical piece of the puzzle. But we also see other issues, a lot of dystonia, and some groups have a lot of movement disorders as well. Go to the next slide. I like to present the DEEs in terms of what I'm going to call the compass points of function. And this was an approach I learned from a physiatrist, Deb Gabler, at the Ability Lab in Chicago. And I'm going to talk about mobility impairment, hand use impairment, eating impairment, and communication. And those percents you see there are the proportion of children who have profound impairment to the point of not having independent function. And I'll tell you a little bit more about mobility and communication in a moment. And something really important I want to emphasize, if I say the person doesn't have profound impairment, I don't mean that person has typical healthy function. I mean that person has some independent function, but none of these children, or very few of them, have what we would call typical function in any of these areas. Okay. So next one. So I want to focus on mobility and communication, both really critical issues. Not that the others aren't, but we're not going to go through everything in the time we have. You can see the pie diagram at the bottom. 52% required a wheelchair, 12% walked, but with assistance, and about 36% could walk independently for short distances in the home. And of those who could walk independently in blue in the upper, yeah, we'll make them available, Kat. For those who could walk independently, you can see in blue in the upper left-hand corner, about half of them could walk up the stairs, step over step, with or without a railing. Most of the rest could take the stairs one step at a time, and a couple had to scoot or be carried. But most of those who could walk independently could do stairs reasonably. Of those who walked with assistance, we saw a lot of walker rollators, support with both hands, and you can have multiple of these so that they don't add up to 100%. And then that little bit more than half who require a mobility device, these are individuals who are profoundly impaired. The others are seriously impaired. Those are the ones who I'm not counting as profound, but the profoundly impaired have poor head and body control, little purposeful limb movements. They need an adaptive chair in order to be seated. They have to be hoisted or lifted. They can't support their own weight, and they can't even take steps, even when supported in therapy. So just to give you a sense of what we mean by a profound impairment. We go to the next slide. Most of the children were considered by their parents to have profound limitations in communication. And one thing I want to mention about communication, We're not necessarily talking about speech. We're not necessarily talking about symbolic language, like signing and use of pictures. We're talking about getting your point across somehow. And there are many different ways we can do that. What you can see from here is about a quarter of the children actually use speech as their primary mode of communication. That does not mean they were very effective at communicating, but that was their primary mode. We have about 2% with signs, another 9% who used adaptive and alternative communication devices. And those I took out because that's sort of the more symbolic language, if you will, where you attach a meaning to a sound or a sign or a picture. The rest focus in on non-symbolic communication, including gestures, sounds, eye gaze, facial expressions, and body movements. Some parents said it's just a mix, I can't tell. And in a small percent, although a very important percent, parents said, we're just not aware that our child is trying to communicate at all. So that's where we are with basic communication. Very importantly, if we look at what life is like in the home, these are some of, not all of, but some of the orthopedic devices that are used. 3/4 have a therapeutic stroller. Even if a child can take steps in the home, when you get out into the world, that child may not be able to, or it may just be easiest and best for everyone to keep the child in a stroller. So a lot of therapeutic stroller use is there. A lot of rollators, we talked about that. Even if they can walk in the home, they may need one outside of the home. A lot of things like AFOs, wrist braces, goes into the bedroom. We see a lot of medical beds, medical lifts and hoists, and therapeutic chairs. And if we were to look at how many of these devices any one child has, there's some children with many of them. Other devices that we see, we've talked about the adaptive communication devices, the AACs. While they're the primary mode of communication for a small proportion of children, I think it was less than 10%, a lot of children are using them a bit. So that's important to keep in mind. We see a lot of corrective lenses. This is not the CVI that Becky will talk about, but actually, I think more ocular issues. For those with autism, we see the headphones being used. And then this really took me by surprise, the number of children who need various kinds of assistive devices for breathing. CPAP, cough assistance, suction devices. I think for some of you, you know that your homes are like a mini ICU, and this degree of equipment use reflects that. And this, really important. We talked about a lot of the hard stuff, but your children are amazing. They're lovely young people, and they have a lot of things they enjoy doing. And you told us about that. A lot of things like listening to music, playing with water, watching movies, cuddling, and being sung to and being read to, massage and stretching. And pretty much everyone across the board has fun with those. And in children who have a little bit more ability, especially with their hands and their bodies, so they can sit up and see, we see that there are a number who like playing games, tech games by themselves on an iPhone or a computer, coloring, building with blocks, doing puzzles, and so forth. So there are a lot of skills that these children have. And that's going to be very exciting to see how we can use that information as we go forward and build our approach to assessing the abilities, not the disabilities, but the abilities that these children have. I think with that, we're going to move on to Gabby. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So, what's really powerful is what's coming through in terms of the priorities. Loud and clear is communication, right? And that's both, we asked about expressive and receptive communication. And you can see without a doubt, expressive communication, this blue bar across the board is one of the most powerful and desires of our families to see develop in our children. And we know, and I can speak to this firsthand, when our kids are crying and they can't tell us what's going on, when they're they're flapping their hands and they're upset and they're, we can't we have to work to interpret what that is that they're trying to say. And we can't, they're not able to tell us. And that's, what's keeping us, from being able to address their needs and their wants and their desires, as caregivers. And so that's not surprising, but it's good to have it confirmed here, and it's across the board, which is really powerful. And you can see that receptive communication is also quite high in a lot of these. That's another desire to see development in our children in that space. Other ones that come across are gross motor, receptive communication here, behaviors, fine motor, sleeping, and GI issues. So these were just this is in response to the question that we asked, what is your top priority for your child? If you could choose one thing that would improve, what would it be? And you were asked that 3 times, people who did the survey. And these are the top 3 choices across. These are the groups that had 20 or more respondents for this disorder. The priorities also change based on disease severity. So this is a little bit complicated to read. And in terms of, so 0 to 4 is the number of domains that are profoundly impaired. So this means that people may have some challenges in these domains, but maybe not be profound. But what we're measuring here is if there's profound impairment in each of these domains. So, sorry, I have to close this window because it's blocking some of it. Okay, so you can see here that for gross motor, as the number of domains or areas that there were the most profound, there was profound impairment with, as the number of those went higher, gross motor became more and more of a challenge. The same with fine motor, for the most part, trended in that direction. And you can see that the more profound the impairments are, the more likely they are to see these challenges occur. But except when it comes down to problem solving, that is a challenge, even when they are less profound impairments, and in particularly behavior. And I think that's, to me, that doesn't seem very surprising as the mom of a kid who's pretty profoundly impacted. I don't see the things that he does as behaviors. I see, if he's throwing his arms around because he doesn't want me to brush his teeth, I see that as communication. Like, I don't want you touching my mouth. Anyway, we can see again, communication, is a top priority across the disorders, regardless of the number of domains in which there are profound impairments. And gross and fine motor are bigger priorities, as the number of severe domains increase, and behavior decreases. So I think I explained that, but if that's not clear, please let me know. Okay. So the number of domains with profound impairment by gene or epilepsy group here. So you can see, again, this is another way of looking at it by the disorder itself. And so we've got here, these are, if there are 0, there are people who answered with 0 profound impairment in these domains. This is with 1 domain that's profound, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see here that there's some diversity, but, I think that's something that we would likely expect. West syndrome or infantile spasms, we know that's typically associated with more profound challenges and outcomes that are not as great. So we see higher levels there as well. All right. So I'm not sure if Jenny has made her way in yet. Jenny, are you here with us?
I am. Thank you, Gabby.
Okay. Oh, you're just showing up as Natasha. I'm just going to rename you, but I'm glad
Oh,
you're
am I
here.
Natasha?
I think because you
Oh.
used her link, but that's okay. You're here. That's all that matters.
Can
I'll
you
fix it.
rename me?
I will fix it. You continue on.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Natasha, also for making sure I got in. So thank you. So after we asked in the survey about priorities that parents had for their child, what was important and so forth, we then asked if you could improve something in your child's condition of those that were listed, what would you choose? And so this this then was then followed by 3 questions. 1, can you describe your child's current abilities and activities in that area? And then we said for that area, what would that smallest piece of improvement be? And then why? And so on the right, you can see an example from the expressive communication domain. And going back to Gabby's slides, you saw that this was one of the most commonly picked areas where parents felt was a priority for them and would be an area that they would pick for wanting to see change. So this is an example of a parent who described in that question 45 to the left, 41 actually, sorry, what would you see? And so the parent described how it would be difficult to understand basic needs. And for the question, what is better? For example, if she was in actual pain, does she have gas? Is it positional, or does she seem unable to engage in activities? So it's wanting to know about pain. And then the third question is why? And so the parent asked why. If it could aid in intervention, if we understood the source, we could offer medicine or a shift in position or some other intervention that related to what the child was communicating. So you can imagine that with all of the surveys that we have, and we asked about 3 priorities where parents would want to see improvement, that smallest improvement that would be meaningful, we had a lot of data. Can you go to the next slide? So this is a very complex table, but the picture is that there are 107 sets of information that describe a meaningful change for across all of the children in the study. And I have ordered this table by the domains on the left that have were most commonly picked, which is the expressive communication, the gross motor skills, receptive communication, behavior, sleep, and GI, just like Gabby presented earlier. But what you can see by scanning down is that for that, all of that information, we actually have a lot of other information on other domains. And so we will be analysing absolutely as much of these spoken perspectives that we possibly can. And you can see going across to the right for some of the more specific groups, we don't have as much because those groups are smaller, and we will certainly be able to look at the priorities and meaningful change as expressed by those parents for children with those particular gene groups for the more commonly endorsed categories. So it's an incredible wealth of information that parents that you have provided with us, and we hope to really do something new and to inform how we measure in clinical trials. So Gabby, if you can go to the next slide. So this is just one example, and what we have done is taken those examples of what that meaningful change was and coded those into categories, and the categories are specific. We've tried to make them as finely grained as we possibly can so that we can be clear which narrative fits into what category. And I will say that every word that is written is given the utmost consideration to map that to a category that we believe is correct for that information. So we are extremely impressed by that information that's been written. And you can see that we have a lot of codes that are about basic communication of needs and wants. A lot of codes also about expressing pain or hurt or discomfort. And that was the example that I presented a couple of slides back. And then going down a little bit, we do see more pieces of meaningful change that would involve more complex skills, such as using words, or expressing feelings, consistency of communication, using words, and so forth. So we are continuing to do this for all of the domains, and continuing as we work with each of the, every time we pick it up and work with it, we check what we've done and reconsider that we have coded correctly. One of our next steps will be to group the codes by the number of severely impaired domains. So we will see for children with none of those 4 compass points that Anne described that are severely to profoundly impaired, we will see what their meaningful changes were described for each of the domains. And for example, for the more impaired children, we will see what their meaningful changes are. So right now it's looking like a table that seems to have all sorts of things in it, but we are going to look for patterns in the data and map those across the different issues that the children are experiencing. So it's very much a work in progress. It's great to have the opportunity to share what we've done so far, and this will be something that we will be able to update you on and give a more specific picture, a pattern of the patterns of the aspects that were changes that would be meaningful, and we really look forward to that at an upcoming webinar. Thank you, Gabby. So the next piece of information is about the quality of life questionnaire. So we administered a quality of life questionnaire called the Quality of Life Inventory Disability, or QI Disability for short. And this is a measure that is a 32-item measure. It was developed for children with different conditions associated with an intellectual disability. And it has these 6 domains. You can see the physical health, positive emotions, and so forth written across the top. So there are 6 domains, and there is 1 overall quality of life score. So we've got 7 scores on this graph for each of the groups of children, the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 domains that are severely impaired. So it's growing in the amount of information we have for children with a genetic epilepsy condition. So again, this is an extraordinarily rich set of information to inform how we understand this measure for your children, and we thank you for that. So the items were developed in relation to parent stories of what was going well with their child, what would you see, and what was happening when there was challenges for the child. And so it's really grounded in parent stories. So on this graph, you can see, as I said, there's 215 parents. Along the bottom axis, the x-axis along the bottom are the number of severe impairments, and on the axis that goes up, the y-axis, we can see the range of scores 0 to 100. Each domain is transformed to a 0 to 100 score, and the total score is out of 100. Well, so we can compare across domains. So what we can see is that the median, in each of these plots, these little longitudinal boxes, there is a line across the middle that's the average score. And the box is where a very substantial proportion of the children will have their scores, and there's also a line that goes up to the maximum score at the top and the minimum score at the bottom. And overall, you can see that the scores were around the 50 to 60, maybe up to 70 mark for some of the domains. They varied a little bit by the type of activities that we're asking about. But overall, there were high scores and low scores for each of the domains, for the total scores, and across all of the groups. So there are similarities across the children. But if we sort of squint, we can see a sort of a gently declining line with lower scores on the right-hand side for the children who were more profoundly impaired. So can we go to the next slide? This one now splits out those vertical bars in each of the graph, we can see the overall score has that very gently declining line. So does the physical health domain go back. So does the positive emotions domain, leisure in the outdoors, social interactions, but particularly independence. And it's really interesting to think about what is in the independence domain. It's not that a child is independent at getting dressed or eating or catching the bus or whatever they are doing, but it's around the child having choice and control, expressing what they need, making their choices, helping with routine activities, doing things with their hands, even if it's with help, and enjoying technology. So that's where we see lower scores. And we feel that this is an indicator for where working with communication, the one of the most priority domains, could be really helpful for this aspect of quality of life. And then there's a final slide, which is the negative emotions domain. So if we have higher scores with this measure, we have better quality of life. And so the children who have fewer domains that are severely impaired are having lower scores. And what that means is they are showing more negative emotions, perhaps more anxiety, more difficulties with regulating their behaviours. And it could be that children who are less impaired have more capacity to demonstrate those behaviours. So this is something that we have seen in other groups of children. And again, we are seeing it with this particular group of children. So we really need to watch that and understand behaviour as a critical part of what we will be looking at for children with DEEs, because it's very much a part of the landscape. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. All right, I'm gonna pass it on to Mary. Mary?
Yes, thank you. And thanks to all of you who are here today, and for all of the parents and caregivers that filled out the survey. It's been really wonderful to learn from you. So one of the forms that was filled out by caregivers was the developmental profile. And this is a commonly used, a currently available tool that's available that many of us have used in clinical practice. It measures development in 5 areas. You can actually go to the next slide. So this is a caregiver reported form, like I said, that measures development in 5 areas. So cognitive development, thinking and problem solving skills. Communication is also measured, understanding language or receptive communication, and also expressive language. So the sounds or gestures or words that an individual uses to communicate their wants or needs. Physical development, and this includes gross motor, so big body skills like rolling, sitting up, walking, and then also fine motor skills, so scribbling or stacking blocks or using a pinch or grasp. Social emotional development refers to social interaction, interest in other kids, ability to express and communicate emotional states, and then adaptive behavior. So this is being able to take care of your daily needs like toileting or feeding yourself. So the form works by having caregivers rate yes or no to items within these scales. And we thought that this might be a good tool for this population. It might be able to help us identify more skills in kids who are in the severe to profound range of impairment than some of our other measures of development or adaptive functioning that are available. So this table represents the scores of the children of the individuals in the sample. So you can see over there on the y-axis, the developmental quotient score. So 100 is average, and don't think of that. That's not a percentage or a number of items correct, but it corresponds to average performance. So that would mean if an individual got a score of 100, a developmental quotient of 100, that their development was average. It was on track. It was right where it should be for their age. And so you can see Jenny did a great job explaining what the boxes correspond to and the lines that come out of the boxes. So you can see that overall, for all of the scales, a significant majority of kids or individuals in the sample are getting a developmental quotient in all of those 5 scales of development, just above or below 20. So that's really falling in the severe to profound, actually profoundly impaired range of development, or functioning. So a lot of the kids in the sample are functioning in that range, with a few functioning a little bit higher. But the lines coming out of the boxes represent, I think, 90% of the sample. So 90% of the individuals are getting a score just above 40 or below 40. If you go to the next slide. So then we also looked at developmental quotients by gene groups. And I think the story that this slide tells is there's a lot of similarity and overlap in functioning level, at least in these individuals who are functioning in the severe to profound range of impairment. So you can see some variability across the gene groups, but again, if we look at the majority of individuals in the sample at those colored boxes, the developmental quotients for most individuals are at 25 or below, again, with 100 being average or the expected age appropriate score. So again, we are seeing a group of kids who are really, and individuals who are functioning in the severe to profound range of impairment. And I think the story is that there's a lot of similarity across gene groups, going back to what Gabby was talking about at the beginning of during the introduction. And then looking at those compass points that Anne mentioned, and that also Jenny mentioned, looking at the number of domains that were in the profoundly impaired range, you can see that on the left, for individuals who had 0 domains that were profoundly impacted, their developmental quotients are overall higher in all areas when compared to individuals who have severe impairment in all 4 areas or domains that we measured. So this, what we're seeing is that the DEE-P4 is giving us some good information, might be useful in individuals, even with severe to profound impairment. We're seeing some differences between the groups. And we're really excited about this score too. So I think one of the things that we really struggle or run into, and I'm sure that you have run into, are what we called floor effects, or individuals getting raw scores of 0, meaning they're not getting any points on our test. And this is because our tests are not sensitive or actually measuring the skills that our kids have. So one thing that we're really excited about is that there's a small number of floor effects or individuals getting 0 points on the items across the scale. Certainly, we wish these percentages were 0, and I think that's a goal that our group has. But these percentages or these floor effects are much lower than some of the other developmental or adaptive functioning tools that we do have. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, one of the things that I wanted to say a little bit was some of the abilities that were demonstrated by the individuals in the sample. And these items are ones that are directly on the form that you filled out, and they correspond to the scores, the average scores in each of the scales in the sample. So for the physical scale, some of the items that individuals in the sample are showing are on average, being able to move from one place to another by creeping or crawling, maybe pulling themselves up on furniture to a standing position. Within the adaptive behavior scale, again, on average, the scores that I mentioned earlier correspond to being able to look for a toy that's hidden, like under a blanket or behind a couch or something, knowing where it is and looking for it. Being able to drink from a sippy cup or drink from a straw. Within the social emotional scale, on average, again, individuals are showing, which I think is really sweet, fondness for people in their lives. They're demonstrating, I know this person, I love them, I'm happy when I see them. They're interested in toys and games that other children are interested in. In the cognitive scale, or the thinking and problem solving skills, individuals on average on the sample are looking towards or showing recognition of a word and what it means. Like, where's my cup? You know, they might look towards it and show that they know that that word matches the object that they're looking for. Aware of and interested in objects that are in their environment, whether they're in their hands or in their area. And then finally, within the communication scale, responding to gestures from another individual, like a wave, demonstrating that they understand what that means, and then picking their arms up in response to someone else reaching out to them to give them a hug or to pick them up. So these are some of the skills that we are seeing individuals in the sample do, and we're really excited about thinking how this DP4 could give us more information and maybe how it could be modified even further to better capture our kids' skills.
So much, Mary. Yeah, I think it's great to demonstrate. It's hard to recall back to what we filled out, but thinking about some of those things that we may have commented that our kids were doing. Yeah. All right, Natasha.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm Natasha Ludwig. I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist at Kennedy Krieger, and I'm a part of the Inchstone project. And, you know, I'm really interested in this construct or ability of awareness and responsiveness to our environment. So next slide. All right. So as a clinician, one of the reasons that I joined the Inchstone project is because I became frustrated, you know, when providers and families asked me to, you know, track their child's progress or track, you know, change in response to an intervention or a new medicine. And I was really grasping at straws to find measures that appropriately capture skills in the children with, you know, really profound impairment. And so a lot of my assessment techniques include, you know, qualitative assessment, talking to the parent about what they see, you know, at home, what they're seeing in the community, and any changes that may have occurred. And so one thing I like to ask is, you know, what does it look like when your child's having a good day? You know, what kinds of behaviors are they showing? And a lot of times I get responses like, oh, well, they're more awake, they're more alert, they're more responsive to the environment, they're smiling more in response to others or things that they see, they're more calm, they're more engaged, they're laughing more, right? And so this is one of the questions that we actually asked you all in this priority survey. And so this little graphic here is actually from a sample of participants in this study. And it shows the words, like the bigger the word, the more people that use that term when they answered this question, right? So lots of laughs and smiles, and they're more engaged and alert. And so I think it's very clear that this concept of kind of awareness, alertness, engagement, right? That kind of emotional responsivity as well is indicative of when a child's doing well, right? At least at this level of functioning. And so if you could just click for the animation, perfect. So I started to think about this, and, you know, it makes sense, you know, when we're thinking about cognition and a child's development, right? We need to be thinking about kind of what are the basic foundational skills that are really needed for a child to show progress and to show kind of developmental progress and gains and learning, right? Well, they need to be able to perceive their environment around them. They need to be able to perceive, you know, the experience of being in therapies or at school or just, you know, being at home and chilling out, right? So they have to be able to perceive it. They have to be awake, alert, and responsive to what is in their environment and in their therapies and in school, right? And that really sets the stage for then, you know, attention, sustained attention, and then learning and development. So for kids with really severe impairments, I think it's really important to capture this idea of being alert, awake, responsive. And it's often, you know, a concept that's really missed in a lot of the measures that we typically use. And so the idea here is that maybe if we find measures that really capture alertness, awareness, responsiveness, that this may be really important and meaningful for these may be really important and meaningful skills to capture for individuals who are really severe to profoundly impaired. And so next slide, please. So what we did was we borrowed some tools that are often used in the neurorehabilitation literature and the intensive care literature that are built to assess responsiveness to the environment. And so one of those tools is the Caregiver Responsiveness Inventory. So this was adapted. This is adapted from a measure that was developed by Wolf and colleagues for adults with acquired brain injuries. And I tweaked it a little bit and adapted it more for a pediatric population. And so this is one of the measures that you all filled out. And this measure, you can get a total score, and the score ranges from 0 to 23 points. So higher scores mean more kind of responsivity or more awareness, more alertness, and lower scores mean less. There's different domains as well that make up the total score. So we look at auditory responsiveness, visual responsiveness, motor, vocal, communication, responsiveness, and arousal as well. And so I think the big kind of takeaway here is that what was really neat is on the total score, no child in the whole sample, over 200 kids, scored at the absolute floor. So everybody had skills that were captured by this tool. And nobody scored at the absolute ceiling or got all the points on the measure. And this is really important to consider when we're thinking about picking a tool that could be useful for individuals with severe impairment. Because if you're already at the ceiling, then it's hard to measure if there's any progress on the tool, right? Next time you give it. And if you're at the floor, it would be hard to measure. Maybe there was progress, but you were still below the floor. And, so this is a really, really important finding. So what I did was I have here the numbers, the average numbers. These are just the average scores that were obtained on each of the domains of the Caregiver Responsiveness Inventory. And what I did to the right was just kind of put some example items that you all responded to. And so the items that I chose were sort of the ones that corresponded to the average, kind of like Dr. Wojnarowski just shared with you about the DP4 and kind of the average skills that were being endorsed by you all. And so I pulled those out here just to show you. Of course, kids in the study were showing even more skills than this, and some kids were showing fewer skills than this. But these kind of statements here represent kind of on average how kids were doing in the sample. And so for auditory, does your relative move their head or eyes towards the location of a sound? Yes, on average, families were saying that was a skill they were able to do. Is your relative able to recognize two objects that are presented to them? Yes. Is your relative able to move, to follow with their eyes? So follow different objects, maybe track you as you're walking across the room. Does your relative move their hand to grasp an object and hold it? So if something's nearby, are they able to kind of they see it, right? Process it and reach out for it. Does your relative produce sounds? Does your child cry or smile? Does your relative usually keep their eyes open independently during school and therapies? So again, these are just some of the skills that were captured, on this measure based on your responses about your children. Okay, next slide. So this is a really complicated slide, but the big picture is when we break up the sample based on the number of kind of domains that are profoundly impacted, right? As we move from the left to the right, we're kind of seeing that the average level of responsivity or the average score on this measure is kind of going downward. So that is consistent with what we would kind of predict, right? The more impairment that you have, perhaps the kind of lower responsivity that you have. And then if you click the next slide, we find the opposite is true as well. So when we look at the scores on this awareness measure and kind of correlate them with cognitive scores on the developmental profile, which is what Dr. Wojnarowski just talked about, we see a positive relationship, right? So as your cognitive skills kind of increase, your awareness and responsivity increases as well. But what I think is really interesting is that if we look, I put a purple line here, okay? And so that purple line basically signifies the score you need on the developmental profile for cognition scale to obtain kind of an age equivalent of about a 12-month level of functioning, okay? And when we look to the left of that line, so all these little black dots are observations of kids. So they're basically scores that represent each child. And what we can see here is that for each score on the developmental profile 4, we're seeing a lot of variability in awareness, responsiveness, alertness in this population. And I think that that's really interesting. It's giving us a bit more range and variability for the kids in this sample that are really the most profoundly impacted, which is exactly the group of kids that we really want to find better measures for, right? And so these data are really exciting, and we're looking forward to continuing to really analyze it. But I think this is telling us that we're headed in the right direction, and we should continue to explore this. And I think that was my last slide. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who participated in this. It's been amazing, as Dr. Wojnarowski said, learning from you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Natasha. Super exciting. I for one, I don't know if others felt this, but it was profound for me. And we use that word a lot in this, but to fill out something and be like, yes, my kid can. Yes, my kid can. Yes, my kid can. And we should all be given that opportunity. So I think we're starting to find tools to help us do that. We're really excited next to welcome Dr. Becky Homer, who is a teacher of the visually impaired and a specialist in cortical visual impairment, to take us through the next section.
So thank you, Gabby, and everybody who so amazingly presented before me. As Gabby said, I am a teacher. I'm a teacher of the visually impaired. I'm an orientation mobility specialist. So my background is education. And so what I bring from you really comes from the lens of the educational format, splattered in with all of this amazing research that we're doing together. So cortical visual impairment. Originally, the term cortical visual impairment was used to describe a visual impairment that was caused by damage to the parts of the brain that process visual information. And this continues to hold true. However, another term, cerebral visual impairment, is also used to describe a vision-based impairment. So what we're finding is these two terms are used interchangeably. You're going to hear both of them, but they both hold true to the meaning that we're looking at a visual impairment that's not caused from structures of the eye, but from the brain, from the parts of the brain that process that information are damaged in some way. So we're one ahead. Sorry, Gabby. As I just said, CVI is a visual-based impairment, meaning our brain is enabled to attend to or interpret visual information. And this occurs from damage to the parts of our brain that organize, manage, store, and interpret visual information. CVI is not ocularly based, meaning the eyes and ocular structure are intact. However, we do see CVI and ocular visual impairments occurring together. CVI is diagnosed by a medical professional, typically an ophthalmologist, a neuro-ophthalmologist, an optometrist, a neurologist, or some other form of clinical specialist. And teachers of the visually impaired, teachers of students with visual impairment, we pinpoint the educational and functional impact caused by CVI. In a perfect world, the clinician and the educational professionals, we would be a unified team. And while that does happen on occasion, what experience has shown us is that children with CVI continue to be underdiagnosed by the clinical professionals and underserved by the educational system. To diagnose a child with CVI, there are 3 criteria. The first, we need a history of neurological impairment. We need visual behaviors that cannot be explained by a clinical exam, and the presence of 10 unique visual characteristics that are associated with CVI. Okay, next. Here we see from the graph that diagnosis or suspicion of CVI differs amongst the gene groups, with SCN2A comprising the group with the largest number of CVI diagnoses and Schenck having none. And our data really shows us that the p-value indicates the differences among the groups are statistically significant. Okay. In regard to our youngest participants, approximately 40% have diagnoses of CVI, and 30% of them are suspected of having CVI. And as the age of participants increase, the number of participants with diagnosed or suspected CVI decreases. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this trend, because as our participants age, I'm hoping to see that we continue to have this really high number of diagnosed children with CVI, if it truly fits them. All right, thank you. As we know, as I've said 100 times already, CVI is a neurologically based visual impairment. And the greater the neurological impact, the greater the number of domains, the greater the likelihood that the areas of our brain that process visual information have experienced some type of damage. And our data shows us that as the number of domains increase, so does the number of participants who have diagnoses or are suspected of having CVI. Again, because it's brain-based, because it's this neurological-based visual impairment, we can predict, we can assume, our data shows us that we have our children with the greatest domains are more likely to have CVI. Okay, 47. The question was, right? Can I tell if my child can see something or if they're looking at something? And a huge characteristic, a red flag for CVI, is the inability to initiate and sustain visual attention to a target, to a face, or to an object. And in our survey, caregivers were asked if they were able to identify at what or where their child was looking. And the caregivers of the participants without CVI diagnoses were able to identify the visual target that their child was looking at with about 75% certainty. However, the caregivers of the participants with diagnosed or suspected CVI could identify at what or where their child was looking with less than 50% certainty. And so for our participants who are nonverbal or language deprived, the inability to consistently identify at or where their children are looking impacts their ability to communicate, particularly when we are asking them to make choices or interacting using visual gaze. And all of our data beforehand, all of you have told us that communication is a high priority. And when we are depending on vision to support that communication, we have to be certain that the way we're presenting this information is accessible to them. If our children's inability to access visual information is unavailable, inconsistent, or unreliable, are we truly measuring their communicative intent? I don't think so. All right, next. So the importance, and we to just carry that thought a little bit farther, we see that visual attention is used in these 3 standardized tests as a means for measuring communication. So again, right, we're asking our child to tell us something using their vision. Will they look at your face? But without having appropriate visual access to the materials, or in this case, a face, are we truly measuring their ability to demonstrate signs of early communication or social engagement skills? All right, so factors affecting my child's vision by diagnosis status. So these survey questions address the type of visual targets, the way in which the participants looked at the target, and the background of the presented targets. We can see that the target color was really not that important for the majority of the participants, meaning the caregivers reported that their child demonstrated the ability to look at targets of a single color. However, providing movement and or reflective properties to the target was important when asking a participant with CVI or suspected CVI to provide visual attention, meaning we needed to move that target to have them look. The manner in which the target was presented was also important for students with CVI, noting that more than 50% of the participants required a simple background for the visual target. We had to be really careful how we were giving that information to them. If I presented a target against my black shirt, that's a simple target. But if I'm presenting against a couch with a floral pattern, that would be inaccessible for those students. The majority of the caregivers also reported that their child has the ability to look at targets presented in more than one visual field. So again, we can see how we use vision to kind of look at the domain, at the non-novel parent reported measures of CVI severity based on the CVI range, scores by CVI diagnosed status. I couldn't get that out in regular English. All right, so the questions provided in the caregiver survey were based on the parent interview questions created by Dr. Roman Lancy. Dr. Roman Lancy designed the CVI range, which measures and scores an individual's use of functional vision and provides a score of 0 to 10, with 0 representing no use of functional vision and 10 representing typical visual responses. And in the previous slide, you saw those 10 characteristics, those 10 areas demonstrated or documented for you. The participants without CVI, diagnosed or suspected, scored high in the CVI range, indicating that there were very few CVI characteristics associated with the way they use their vision. The students with a diagnosis of CVI scored in the middle of the range with a mean score of 5.5. And the participants with suspected CVI have a broader scope of scores within the CVI range, with the mean falling close to the scores of the participants with diagnosed CVI. So our kiddos with diagnosed, we're seeing them score right there in the middle of that CVI range. And the suspected scores are also pretty much in line with that, but there's more of a range on where they scored. All right, and that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Becky. I'm going to hand it over to Jayetta now to share some of our proposed presentation of this data.
Thanks, Gabby. We'll move very quickly through this. So basically, all of the groups that had over 20 participants will get these summary charts, as well as all the data that is sorted by the disease groups. So this will summarize the diagnoses, the participants, the quality of life data, the aids, the top wishes, and a couple of key measures on communication and tube feeding. The next page shows a different version. This is the one for LGS. And basically, these are really powerful lens to really focus on a subset of all the populations of the high participating groups. It's not representative of your whole population, but it's for the first time finding this honed in summary of this rarely measured, poorly understood subpopulation. And we are so grateful for these groups for the kind of promotion and communicating to families who are all worn out with surveys, that this one was worth participating. And as everyone said, the results are amazing. And I'll stop there because we want to hear from you.
Okay, that was a lot, I know. So I'm going to open it up for questions. We'd love to focus and hone in on questions from families who are part of the survey or are listening to this and wondering, what it is we're doing and how it might apply to you. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll focus in on really trying to answer any questions you might have. As we wait for some to come in, I did get one in advance from a family that asked, so what happens? We make these measures that are adapted that can measure our kids. How does that make a difference? What is it truly going to do? How's it going to change the game for families who haven't been measured in the past? I don't know if somebody wants to take that. I mean, and yeah, you've been working on this a long time. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And it's not just that it's nice to have a measure that measures if there's a small change. We're on that threshold now where gene-based therapies or gene targeted, and I mean that in the very broadest sense, from enzyme replacement to gene replacement and everything in between. But those therapies are starting to look like a reality. We're just starting, but they're really coming to us soon, in a year near us soon. And the question is, does it make a child better? Does it make someone with one of these severe disorders better? And in order to answer that question, we have to be able to measure where the person is now and to measure if there is a meaningful improvement. And current measures don't do that. You've probably heard me use the example of a mouse before. If you have a little mouse and you put him on your bathroom scale, he weighs exactly 0 pounds. And you can watch him grow and you can see him grow, and you keep putting him on the scale and he keeps weighing 0 pounds. It's the wrong instrument. We need something that can measure how many milligrams he weighs or how many grams he weighs as he gets a little bigger and then bigger, and you can actually see those differences. One challenge we have is that these are rare diseases, so the trials are going to be very targeted with small samples. And if a trial cannot show that this therapy improves a patient's condition, whatever aspect of the condition is chosen, the trial is going to fail. And these drug companies are going to put in millions and millions of dollars into trying to develop a drug and then not be able to show it had any effect only because it wasn't measured well. Now, it may not have an effect, but if it doesn't happen, if the trial fails to show an effect, we want it to be because the drug doesn't work. We hope it works, but if it fails to work, to show an effect, it should be because the drug didn't work, not because we used the wrong measurement. So that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're aiming for. Sorry, that was long, but it's really important.
Yeah, no, critical. I mean, we have seen in the DEE community, the rare epilepsy community, trials that have failed, despite the fact that kids are more alert and awake and engaged, just because there was no way to actually truly measure that. Families are screaming from the rooftops, this is working, it's helping. But if FDA does not have data to show that it's actually doing something, then it will not get approved. It can't, they can't do it without data. So there's a question about if these measures could also be applied to insurance companies as proof of treatments working, which is a really interesting question. And even for schools as measurements of proof to continue services. I think it's a great question, and we're thinking about that a lot. We do believe that these are tools that can be used in clinical care. I mean, maybe our clinicians can speak to that, Mary and Natasha. Natasha, you talk about getting called in by neurologists before kids start a new treatment to say, let's get a baseline, right?
Yeah, all the time. That's I think I shared, that's part of why I joined Inchstone, because I was so frustrated. I'm asked all the time to evaluate a child at baseline and then put them on a medication or try them with a new treatment, and are they better, right? And so, I think that was my initial motivation for joining, and then I learned about the clinical trials problem too. So now there's so many reasons why, I think this is so important. But I think that the point of this is really to evaluate, change and progress or decline if something is harmful, right? That's important too. And so I think that goes for clinical trials, but also for clinical care or interventions in school too, and in therapies. So, Mary, did you want to say anything else about that?
I just to agree with everything that you mentioned. I often felt clinically I was giving a long spiel about all the caveats to the test that I gave and all the problems with it before I actually gave the score. So having a tool, I think that is appropriate for the individuals that we're seeing is not only important for clinical trials, but clinically as well, to help parents and families understand the skills that their relative has, and what also, what sorts of goals or things that they could be working on to help development move forward. And I think you're absolutely right. I certainly have encountered children being switched to like consultative therapy because they're plateaued or they're not making progress anymore. I have definitely heard families talk about that. So I think that's critical. If we can find a tool that shows that kids are making progress, then that would give parents and families, you know, the ability to advocate for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jada, can you say something about why we decided to do this project across disorders? You know, what's the value in doing this? You know, somebody had asked me, you know, not in preparation for this webinar, but just in general, like why would you do it that way?
Well, I think it relates back to why we launched Deep Connections in the first place, that we have so much in common. And when the drug development process and the clinical outcome assessment development process is disease by disease, the 100 rare epilepsies that aren't among the biggest groups are going to be left behind. And we've seen this with the long process of approval of Epidiolex or other drugs that basically the companies mostly start with the Dravet or LGS and maybe tuberous sclerosis. And all the clinical measures are disease by disease. So we're basically going into a territory that says we have enough in common in both the abilities and what's important to families that we should be seen as a group, and it has the potential to accelerate access for, you know, there are over 100 rare epilepsies in the Rare Epilepsy Network. And none of us are going to have the resources and the capacity for the kind of research that it takes to do this. But by doing it together, doing it and establishing the similarity of challenges and priorities, then we really have the potential for tools and instruments that will hopefully accelerate more diverse investment across the DEEs and better measurement of impacts in more than 2 or 3 of the high population disorders.
Great. And Jenny, would you just tell us quickly what's next in terms of how does validation work? How do we actually get through this?
We have a lot of ideas for how this very rich data set can be interrogated, and we need to do that to understand a concept that the FDA is very interested in called fit for purpose. And for a measure to be fit for purpose, there is evidence that it is working for the population of interest. And as has just been explained, we're interested in a group of DEE conditions. So what fit for purpose means is that we understand the items of the scales. We understand that they are appropriate to the children, they are appropriate to the end users, and that is a concept called content validity. And so we will be doing some focus groups, and I think we might come back to that on the final slide, but that is coming with some of the families who completed these measures, so we can understand more about experience. So that's really a critical component of the final bit of data collection that we really need to do before we can really kind of get our whole picture together. And then because we have around about 260 data sets, and for quality of life, we have 215, a little bit smaller, but we've got a lot of data for the DP4 as well, and the vision and so forth. And we will be able to look at those measures in terms of how the items are working at a more granular level than what we have done now, and really work to understand their structure for the DEE groups. And many of the measures have been used with other groups or are well established and have been used for other groups. So we need to really establish what are the characteristics, how valid are they, and how reliable are they for children with DEE. So all of that together will be part of the getting it ready for deciding, is this fit for purpose? And the other aspect that you've heard discussed is Mary said it, right? She was explaining the caveats before she would administer a measure, just or before she would sort of talk about the scores. And so did Beck when she talked about the differences in the way you might want to present a task. And so a part of us getting fit for purpose is to understand what are the essential modifications to make sure that the items are accessible to the children. So fit for purpose in terms of content, in terms of statistical analyses, and taking into account what modifications we may need to recommend. And we will be able to test those modifications in some clinical assessments that are coming up soon as well. I think that's it. Gabby.
Yeah, and I got excited when you I thought I would gonna use seamlessly carry us through, but then I did it a little too prematurely. But essentially, we do have some, additional ways that people can continue to support the work we're doing and contribute. One of them being these focus groups. Jenny, do you want to just quickly chime in on what the purpose of these is going to be?
Yes, so this backs up what it just expands a little bit on that whole notion of being fit for purpose. We need to go to end users to understand what the measures mean to you and your child. And so we have designed a run sheet, which we will use with a focus group. And a focus group is around about 6, 8, maybe 9 or 10, but probably less than 10 families. We want to do 2 focus groups per topic. And for example, we will look at the quality of life measure in one. We will look at the cognition subscale of the DEE-P4 in another. We will look at the items that we have designed for CVI and the awareness and responsiveness domains questionnaires as well that Natasha talked about. But we also want to have another focus group on those priorities and the impacts, just to sort of understand more of lived experience in relation to the tick box answer or those small descriptions that we had, which are all incredibly important, but we need to integrate that with a greater depth of information. So each of these focus groups will be critical for working forward next steps along all of these different streams of work. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah. So if you did the survey and said that you were interested in participation, we'll be reaching out soon to give you an opportunity to sign up to share your thoughts on these. So be on the watch your email. Jayetta, another thing in the pipeline we're looking at. You want to talk a little bit about this and what the purpose would be?
Yeah, I think we've made it clear that there's the main audience for this is actually the FDA. FDA is the one that approves or rejects different clinical outcome assessments. And what's novel that we're doing here is proposing an outcome assessment battery that will cut across the DEEs. And there is a mechanism to reach out to FDA and bring the community voice, family voices. And it's called a listening session. It's 90 minutes. It's geared for caregivers and advocates. It's not the science part of the presentation, but the family perspective. And the purpose is to hear from families. And in this case, it would be about that the DEEs have actually a lot of shared non-seizure impacts, which are very high priority. And there's a concern and an urgency for better outcome measures, and that measures that cut across disorders are clearly going to be an option for more accelerated progress. So we will be working with the high reporting groups to organize that, but it would be an open meeting and we will be in touch. It's an application and we'll let you know if FDA agrees to hear from us, and we'll look for, even though it'll be virtual, a full room of families saying, we have a lot in common and we want to see trials that cut across DEEs, and we want to see accelerated, improved outcome measures that cut across DEEs.
Yeah, and I think one thing to add, just to highlight this, is what Jada was saying, is that, I think if you're following along and you're seeing that there are trials that are, one disorder at a time, and then they start another trial, which takes another 3, 4, 5 years to get approval for a drug in a certain disorder, what we're looking to do is advocate within the FDA that they allow more of something called a basket trial, which is across the DEEs all at the same time, so that we don't have to wait or fight to get drugs off label. So I'll leave it there. And then Natasha and Mary are going to be doing clinical assessments, which is another critical part of the process of validating these tools. We will share these slides. You can reach out to either of them to start scheduling. Come in, try some of these assessments on site, see how they're working, give us feedback. We're really excited about that. Anything you want to add here, Natasha or Mary? This would be in Baltimore or Columbus, Ohio. Great. All right. Lastly, we want to make sure we thank this work only happens because we have industry partners who are willing to stand beside us and work alongside us. And so we'd love to thank our partners who not only provide us some funding to carry out this clinical research, which is costly, but also sit at the table and help us think about how we need to work in terms of considering what has to happen during a clinical trial. We want these tools to be ready and usable in the trials that they're running, so that they can truly test the power of the drugs that they are, or treatments that they are working on. So thank you to all of them. We're really grateful for your partnership. We also have an incredible group steering committee who sit with us, of researchers and clinicians and patient advocates who are helping guide our work. So it couldn't happen without all of them, and it certainly couldn't happen without all of you, families and caregivers who took your time. I know as a DEE mom myself that time is very, very precious, and we know that this took a fair amount of time to do this. So we're grateful to you for contributing, and we hope that you'll stick along for the ride with us. We'll continue to share more about what's going on and keep you posted, and hopefully be sharing a lot more data thank you for the love in the chat. That's really nice, y'all. But we really are so passionate about this work. All of us, you can see that everybody speaks with passion about the work that we're doing here. And we're really motivated by all of you. So thank you so much, and reach out anytime. You know how to find me. Just go to, inchstoneproject.org if you want to learn more, or find us on social media and write to us. We'd love to stay in touch, hear more about what, what's working for you, what you'd like to see more of, or if you just have questions, that's what we're here for. So thank you all. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.